He was sent in chains to the neighboring village of Santa Maria. Francia refused to see him. He was not in prison, but a watch was kept upon him, and he was forbidden to return to Assumption. He was allowed to practice as a physician, so he whirled away the months and years of his captivity in making medicine, distilling, and composing liquors, and in going about to minister to the sick and afflicted. He wore only the coarsest of garments and went barefooted. It was a long time before intelligence of this outrage reached Europe, but it did at last while Humboldt was residing in Paris, and left no means untried to secure the release of his friend and fellow traveler. He interested the French government in his behalf, and the Chateaubriand, who was then Minister of the Affairs of Strategies, demanded his freedom from the tyrannical Francia. It was not granted. The Emperor of Brazil made the same demand with the like success. At last, however, after a captivity of nearly 8 years, Bonpland was set at liberty. What influence was powerful enough to compel Francia to this tardy act of justice, it is not known. But it is said to have been that of Bolivia. If so, he probably owed his freedom to Humboldt. We know that Humboldt was at the time in correspondence with Bolivia in reference to the internal improvement of his country, and we cannot doubt that he urged that the cause of his friend with him, as he had previously done with the French and Brazilian governments. It was Humboldt, we believe, who restored Bonpland to liberty. Ostentatiously set free on the 12th of May in 1829, he took the road to the missions, but when he arrived at Itaputa, there was no order there for his release. He remained at Itaputa some months before the capricious dictator could make up his mind to let him go. On the 6th of December, 1830, the creatures of Francia again beset him and demanded of him for the 4th time the motives of his former association with the Indians. They insisted upon knowing whether he was a spy of the French or the Argentine governments. Finally, on the 2nd of February 1831, they told him that he was free to cross the Parana, and that the Supreme, not his maker, but one of his maker's worst specimens of humanity, Francia, allowed him to go where he would. He hurried toward Brazil and fixed his residence on the frontier near little city of San Borja. There, in a modest cottage surrounded by a large garden of orange trees, he passed the remainder of his life, practicing medicine, botanizing, and writing to Humboldt and the savans of Europe. He died last year, for 80 years old. When Humboldt accepted the offer of the Russian government to explore the mountains of the Ural, he selected 2 companions for the journey: Christian Gottfried Ehrenberg and Gustav Rose. Both these naturalists were young men, one being 30 years old and the other 33, which was about the age Bonpland and Humboldt were when they started on their great transatlantic journey 29 years before. Rose, who had studied chemistry and mineralogy, was the conservator of the collection of minerals in the University of Berlin, and Ehrenberg, whose specialty was the microscope, had traveled with Eperich through Egypt, Abyssinia, and a great part of the Arabia, and had brought back from those countries a magnificent collection of plants and animals, many of which were still unknown in Europe. The narrative of his travels, which lasted from 1820 to 1825, was published while the preparations for the Asiatic journey was in progress. It was edited by Humboldt. Besides editing or helping to edit this work, and attending to the measurements of temperature, which the king, at his suggestion, had caused to make in all Prussian mines, the never-resting traveler was occupied and troubled with the afflictions of his brother. William was indeed afflicted, for Frau Caroline, who had been in ill health for years, was slowly dying. At the close of Alexander's lectures, he had taken her to Paris and London, in the hope of a journey thither and the use of the bath of Gastine at which they were to stop on their return would benefit her. But it was not to be. They returned to Tegel in the middle of September, and she was worse than ever. She failed rapidly, and towards the end of November was in constant expectation of death. November, December passed, and she still lived. All over the land, and the Christmas holidays were celebrated. The candles were lighted on the Christmas tree. The peasants were plucked from the branches, and rich and poor, young and old, rejoiced in the birth of the blessed Christ child. But at Tegel, all was sad. No Christmas tree, no gifts, no happy hearths. All was stillness and gloom. The hush of the sick chamber, the shadow of the coming doom. The new year came and went, and Frau Caroline still lived. Alexander visited her on a Lord's Day in January. She was dying, he wrote to a friend, opened her eyes and said to her husband, "Another human being is ended." She expected her death, but in vain. She lived again and took an interest in what was going on around her. She prayed much. So wrote Alexander on the 22nd of January, 1829. He was still preparing for his journey. Frau Caroline was prepared for hers. It was a short one. Quote, "One step to the white deathbed, and one to the bier, and one to the charnel, and one, oh where, the dark arrow fled into the noon." She departed on the 26th of March. There was another grave at Tegel.